Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council. The most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick message from the BCRC.
When you're comparing multiple feed options, price per ton doesn't tell the whole story. In this episode, we talk about a simple tool that helps you compare the nutrient value of different feeds against standard references like barley and canola meal, so you can make smarter buying decisions based on actual feed value. Use the tool in the show notes and take the guesswork out of feed purchasing. This episode is titled Fiber in Finishing Diets and features the BCRC's Science Director, Dr. Reynold Bergen.
I'm Reynold. This research on the record article originally appeared in the September 2025 issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine. It's been reposted on the beefresearch.ca site with the publisher's permission. And today we're going to talk about unwinding the fiber in finishing diets. So everybody kind of understands that high-grain feedlot finishing diets improve feed conversion efficiency and help produce high-quality, well-marbled beef. Corn is the dominant feed grain used in central and eastern Canada and the U.S. Barley has historically been more common in western Canada. And corn and barley are quite different in terms of how they're digested. So the way corn starch is structured in the kernel means that it's digested more slowly by the animal than barley is. To overcome that, feedlots will typically process corn using a steamroller to level the playing field with barley in terms of digestibility and animal performance. You can get away with dry rolling for barley, and that's simpler, it's less costly, and it works just fine. But in Western Canada, corn has become more common in recent years, partly due to decreasing barley acres, partly due to increasing corn acres, and partly due to corn imports. And so that's led some feedlots in the West to install steam rollers to process their corn. And so that's led some researchers to question whether, well, maybe steamrolling will actually help to improve the digestibility and animal performance on barley-based diets the same way it does for corn. So that's one question they had. Now I'm going to change gears a little bit. High-grain diets need to be managed pretty carefully to avoid abnormal feeding behavior, rumen acidosis, and liver abscesses. Those are things that can all negatively affect cattle health and welfare and performance. To counteract this, forage, typically silage, is fed as a fiber source to help maintain normal rumen function and avoid some of those problems. Of course, the challenge is that when you feed a lot of forage in the diet, it reduces both feed intake and feed efficiency in the feedlot. And so finding the right forage to concentrate ratio is tricky. And feedlot animal's fiber requirements may be more than just simply the amount of fiber they get. Not all forages and fibers are the same. The important thing might be to provide the right level of the right kind of fiber. So, for example, fiber length is important. Fiber that's too short won't be physically effective, and that means it won't provide the scratch factor that stimulates rumen activity. And that's why distillers' grains can't totally replace roughage in a finishing diet. The particles in distillers' grains are too small, too fine to be physically effective, and so your fiber level might look just fine on paper, but still end up with rumen acidosis. So fiber length is important, but chemical makeup of the fiber is also important. In recent years, researchers have been looking more closely at neutral detergent fiber, or NDF. Now, some forms of NDF can be digested, but NDF is really hard to digest when it's bound to lignin. And lignin is a compound that's in the stem of plants. It acts like rebar to help the plant stand up. And so if you've got NDF that's complexed with lignin, it can withstand digestion in the rumen for up to 240 hours. So that's 10 days. So they call that undigestible NDF, or UNDF. All right, so we're getting to the research now. Tim McAllister and some of his co-workers at Agriculture Canada in Lethbridge and the University of Guelph and the University of Saskatchewan have been studying how barley rolling method, so steam versus dry rolling, and UNDF level affects animal performance and digestive health in finishing cattle. So as always, the online version of the article links to the published paper if you want to read that. So they took 400 Angus cross steers that averaged 970 pounds, and they put them onto 4 different finishing diets. And those were roughly 90% grain, 6% roughage, and 5% supplement. They did a small pen trial at Agriculture Canada Lethbridge. So they had 100 steers per diet. Each diet contained either dry rolled barley or steam rolled barley as the energy source. So they took 400 Angus cross steers. They averaged 970 pounds at the start, and they put them onto 4 different finishing diets. Each of those had 90% grain, 6% roughage, and about 5% protein supplement, vitamins, minerals, and so on. And they fed them in a small pen trial in Lethbridge at Agriculture Canada. So there are 100 steers per diet. Each diet contained either dry rolled barley or steam rolled barley as the energy source. And then that was mixed either with barley silage or barley straw as the roughage source. The physically effective fiber levels were 15% higher in the silage than the barley straw. So the silage had more scratch factor. But the undigestible NDF levels were 85% higher for the barley straw than for the barley silage. So 26.8 versus 14.5%. That's 85% difference. So the point is that the main difference between those two roughage sources was the undigestible NDF level. So they fed those cattle once a day for 112 days. They monitored rumen pH throughout the experiment in 6 steers per diet, and they measured growth, performance, feed conversion, individual feeding behavior, rumen pH, carcass data, liver abscess scores, lots of stuff. And they learned that steam rolling didn't provide any clear benefit over dry rolling for barley grain. But the UNDF level affected both feeding behavior and rumen health. So looking at growth performance, so this is feed intake, average daily gain, gain to feed, that was unaffected by whether the grain was steam rolled versus dry rolled or by the undigestible NDF level. That didn't matter at all. Feeding behavior wasn't impacted by either of the barley grain rolling methods either. But UNDF was important. Steers that were fed the high UNDF straw diet, so 6% straw in the finishing diet, spent more time at the bunk, they ate more slowly, and had shorter meals more often, even though they grew just as well. Rumen pH wasn't affected by whether the barley was steam-rolled or dry-rolled either, but steers that were fed the high UNDF straw diet had a less acidic rumen pH than steers that were fed the low UNDF silage diet. The high UNDF straw diet also produced less rumen acidosis. So compared to steers that were fed the silage diet, the steers that were fed the high UNDF straw diet spent 3 fewer hours per day at a pH below 6, 4.5 fewer hours per day at a pH below 5.8, and 12.5 fewer hours per day at a pH below 5.2, which is getting pretty acidic. And again, so there was no difference in growth performance, but they seemed to have a healthier rumen. In terms of carcass traits, carcass weight, dressing percentage, lean yield were unaffected by barley grain rolling method or by UNDF level. They did find that significantly more steers that had been fed a dry rolled barley diet graded AAA or choice compared to steers that were fed steam rolled barley. So it was 82% versus 70%, but they did note that other researchers have never seen this, and so that result shouldn't be taken to the bank. But UNDF level had no effect on quality grade. Liver abscess score was unaffected by either the barley grain rolling method or by the undigestible NDF level. They did find that steers fed the high UNDF straw diet had 15% fewer severe liver abscesses than steers that were fed the low UNDF silage diet, but that difference wasn't statistically significant. So what does this mean to you? Well, it's important to steamroll corn grain to get it to perform the way barley does. But if you're just feeding barley, steamrolling really doesn't offer any clear benefit over traditional dry rolling. So that's good to know. But undigestible NDF levels do appear to be important. So in this study, without changing the level of roughage in the diet, so it was still 6%, the research team was able to improve rumen health and rumen conditions by increasing the level of UNDF in the diet. These are pretty early days, and at this point, UNDF can only be measured using rumen incubation experiments, and so it's not practical or affordable. Physically effective fiber is a lot simpler, it's a lot quicker, it's a lot more affordable to assess than UNDF, and so, physically effective fiber or scratch factor will probably remain the gold standard for the time being. But the bottom line is really one of those big picture things. After a big problem gets solved, the solution often seems really obvious, and why didn't we do that right from the start? But coming up with those solutions to those big problems is rarely simple, it's rarely fast, and it's rarely easy. And finding ways to cost-effectively optimize feed efficiency, animal health, and welfare all at the same time is a big challenge, and efforts to solve it will need to continue for a while. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.